Our trip to Japan started not in Japan. We drove down to Los Angeles the night before to spend the night in a hotel there. Our flight was early morning, so it made more sense to stay closer to the airport to minimize chances of delays or anything else of that happening. This isn't my first trip to Japan, but I was really excited to head back now that I'm older and can appreciate it more. Early the next morning, we got up and took the shuttle to the airport. Since we hadn't eaten a proper breakfast, we went ahead, did some hunting and gathering, did some plane watching. Before we knew it, it was time to board and get on our flight. So if you've never been on a long-haul flight before, they do give you some more amenities like that little pillow, blanket, and slipper combo. They also give you meals on the flight. Since I'm vegan, I was getting the vegan meal. They gave us some pasta, as well as a little bit of salad and fruit, as well as a roll with some butter, but the butter was a vegan, so I ended up not using it. For the second meal, they gave us some more fruit. There was also a tofu sandwich, which is what I believe to be spinach. It was super cold. I don't think I ended up eating a lot of it, but overall not too bad, I guess, for a vegan option. It ultimately didn't really matter because before I knew it, we were landing in Haneda and officially in Japan. After landing in Haneda, we just unloaded our luggage and exchanged our currency before heading to our hotel. Haneda Airport is the better airport to land in because it's closer to Tokyo as opposed to Narita, because it's further from everything. That we stayed at was the Henna Hotel, which is the robot hotel franchise in Japan. So every time you check in, you check in with an animatronic, and it's completely automated. If you can't speak Japanese, it's fine because kiosk has different language options as well. Then we headed to a room and opened it, and this hotel, just as a disclaimer, was only for us to kind of crash in before we went to the next part of Japan. So it doesn't have a ton of amenities, but there is no staff to interact with. But overall, I found it really nice, and it was a good place to rest up before our next part of our journey. Settled in, we went out to go look for some food for dinner. We went to this supermarket called 𝓈𝓸𝓽𝓪𝓶𝓹. And since we're vegan, we look a little differently, mostly for fresh foods and fruits, so that sort of thing. And Japan is a really good place to look, but you do have to be careful in cases like this.
It has eyes.
Some food emojis can be difficult, but I actually found it easier in Japan despite the language barrier. The foods in Japan I found to be fresher and clearly labeled, without too many extra things, so if it wasn't an allergen, it was usually something I could eat. I ultimately settled on getting some inari sushi, which is basically tofu skin stuffed with rice. It's usually served with ginger, and it's a staple for us because it's super cheap and it's easy to get from most places, and it's a pretty good buy. After we finished shopping, we went back to the hotel to rest up because we had another early flight the next day. The next morning, we took a shuttle back to Haneda Airport so we could get on our next flight to Tsushima. However, we still needed to find somewhere to eat, so we decided to look around and see what restaurants were available. So noodle restaurants usually aren't too bad because you can ask for soy sauce broth instead of fish broth, but you have to be careful for parts like that are fish instead of a radish. We were able to find a vegan restaurant called Healthy Tokyo, and it's one we had been to before. They had sandwiches, but the sandwiches had cashew cheese, so me and my sister had to pass. Is one of the many convenience stores in Japan, and it has good options for if you don't know what to eat and you don't want a lot of it. In this case, I discovered something very nice, which was the udon. Now, I hadn't tried this the last time I went to Japan, but this time I decided to be a little adventurous and branch out. The broth in this case did have dashi, which is a fish-based broth, but you can always swap it for soy sauce. My parents ultimately ate at the vegan restaurant. They tried the quiche as well as two of the sandwiches, one being the panini and the other one being the tuna melt. This one here is the panini. Lastly, we activated our rail passes and then we were on our way. After 2 plane rides, we finally arrived at the island of Tsushima. Tsushima is a small island between Japan and Korea, and initially I wasn't really sure what to expect. However, it ended up being really peaceful. I absolutely loved it and I cannot wait to go back. The first thing we ended up doing after the airport was visiting a little museum about the history of Tsushima before heading to our hotel to check in. This is 𝓻𝒾𝓁𝓈. It has umeboshi, as I mentioned before, which is the pickled plum, and the onigiri is a rice ball. So it's a rice ball with a pickled plum in the middle. It's one of my absolute favorite snacks whenever I go to visit Japan, because not only is it vegan, I really like tart and sour things, so it's definitely a staple whenever I come. Next, we visited a nearby store just to see what they had. This store was a hakyuen shop, which is basically kind of like a Japanese Dollar Tree. Everything was super affordable. They had yarn, house supplies, tons of stationery, which I ended up getting way too much of. Time to go on to our next attraction, which was a nearby beach. The thing about this beach was it was technically closed towards school children because it wasn't cleaned up and ready yet, but a friend of ours took us anyway so we could experience the Japanese sea up close. The next morning, we had part of the hotel's provided breakfast, so we had the tofu, rice, and cabbage with some soy sauce. Then I got some editing done for the photos, and we were off to the mall. This time I had my eye on 2 purses, and I couldn't decide between the 2 of them, so I ended up beating up. After, I bought my coolest purchase from the whole trip, an actual Shonen Jump, all in Japanese, but I will learn to read it. Next, we had a Tsushima specialty for lunch, 𝓂𝓾𝓲𝓽𝓪. It's a special type of udon made from sweet potato. Really good for a vegan option, but you will have to let the chef know that you want a mushroom-based broth instead of a fish-based broth. Overall, super good, highly recommend. After lunch, we went to a place called 𝑖zuhara Park. This park was really nice, especially for the summer. It had lots of little pools, and apparently during the rainy season, or when it rains more, it was better until you could slide down the rocks.
My friend, you very what?
That makes sense because in that
Before I knew it, time in Tsushima was over, and it was time to head on to our next destination. After arriving back in Fukuoka, we headed to Kagoshima via the Shinkansen. Now, the Shinkansen is a bullet train in Japan that goes really fast, but when I was on it, it actually did not feel as fast as I expected, but we still covered a lot of ground in a really short pace of time. After we got to Kagoshima, we headed to our hotel, And just a quick note, if you were booking under the Toyoko Inn, there were 2 branches here, the east and the west. We thought we were at the west, but we're actually the east, so we had a bit further to go. It's a pretty decent hotel. Most hotels I've encountered in Japan are actually smaller than American ones, so it can feel really tight if you're not used to it. But overall, pretty nice. After we got checked in, we headed to a nearby shopping center, and this is where I encountered my very first Don Quixote or donkey. Personally, I was not a fan of donkey. If you're used to American stores, donkey is really loud and kind of overstimulating, but they had some cool finds, so I definitely recommend going to check it out for yourself and see if you like it. Since we were only in Kagoshima on business, we didn't visit any tourist attractions. We just stopped at a grocery store to find some ingredients for dinner, and we were on our way. After Kagoshima, we took the Shinkansen to Osaka, where I bought an accessory for my camera since it's cheaper in Japan. And then we went to the Umeda Sky Building, a very tall building in Osaka that gives you a great view of the city line. We ended up having to walk a while to get to it, but once we got there, it was incredible. I highly recommend. We went to the 𝓭𝓭𝒾𝓁𝓭. It has this huge Ferris wheel and whale sharks, which was my primary thing I was really excited about. There's also a shopping center nearby. There's a little sandal store, but that was a bit too much for me, so I left that long after entering. And plenty of souvenirs if you're interested in more Osaka regional specialties. Where we went to 𝓻𝒾𝓁𝓈, or America Town. to look around and then find some food. In this case, since we're vegan, we had to look for a vegan restaurant, and I've been doing research for weeks before we even went on our trip. I settled on this place called Okofan Vegan Okonomiyaki, which is a traditional Japanese food, but they offer vegan versions for both their okonomiyaki and their yakisoba. After dinner, we explored a little more dotonbori before turning in for the night. To the Shinkansen from Osaka to Tokyo and visited Akihabara, which is known as the anime district. It was a bit much for me, if I'm being honest, but overall it was plenty to do, plenty to see, and very interesting. We went to Donkey to get some souvenirs as well as more suitcases since we were overweight for some of our luggage. We visited the Hal Okada Vegan Sweets Lab. This man is an absolute angel. It's a bakery run by a pastry chef who started making vegan desserts because he wanted people with food allergies to enjoy good pastries. They were incredible, well packaged, not too expensive, and I highly recommend to anybody, vegan or not. Solid 10 out of 10. After a full 10 days in Japan, we headed back to the Haneda airport and boarded our plane to go.